Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to another tutorial by EClip Music on my YouTube channel. For this week, I needed a little bit courage to start this tutorial, as I want to talk a little bit about gain staging, and is a pretty theoretical and a little bit kind of a harder topic for me, as my English is not my native language and I need to speak a lot about some specific stuff. So it was a bit challenging, so I was trying to avoid this topic, but I get more and more messages about the gain staging. Now, when it comes to the gain staging, you will have a link below of my blog, and on my blog I wrote what I think about the gain staging, and also I put one link, really nice explanation about the gain staging and all around it. So I will not go in the technical parts, I will just try to explain how you can use it in your own production. And this also depends from the way of your setup and how do you make your music. In a way, do you use an external or hardware gear? If you're using a hardware gear, or if you have a compressor or something that you use to process your signal, then gain staging has a much bigger value, as when you deal with a hardware piece of gear, by cranking up the gain, you're actually bringing the voltage inside that unit and you are cranking up the electricity in a way. So every piece of the hardware, they have a sweet spot, kind of a amount of electricity. When they take that exact amount of electricity, they will have the best results. And usually it's around minus 18 RMS, what I had a chance to read about some of the hardware gears. But if you're not using hardware gear, if you are mixing everything in the box and if you use only plugins, then the gain staging is not that important. And if you are mixing and doing with the plugins only, we just need to be careful to not clip our channels. And this is all you need to do about gain staging if you are mixing in the box. I won't go inside the story about if you're using a hardware gear, because I do not use any of hardware gear for processing my sound. I do use converters and summing mixer, but this is not the same thing as if I had a compressor or something else. So when it comes to the in the box, when it comes to the gain staging, I only follow a few steps to make it sure that I do not clip my channels. As we all know that all the samples that we are buying today are normalized to 0 dB peaks. And when it comes to that topic, let's say I'm using this kick, and this kick is already normalized to 0 dB of the peaks, and that means that this is reaching the highest point of the peaks. So if I solo and I play, we can see that it's going to the ceiling, as I call it, but actually reaching the maximum point of the peaks in this moment. What does that mean? We take a sample that is normalized on 0. That means that its own input gain is at 0. So basically, if we want to apply, for example, an EQ, and we want to bring maybe for 1 dB by the shelf, the highs and lows, the highs and mids, that will mean that inside the channel we are clipping it already, because it's already normalized to 0 and we are adding something on top. And in Cubase and the most of DAWs, the signal chain goes input gain, then it goes to the insert, then it goes to the channel strip, then it goes to the EQ, then it goes to the send, and then the last in the chain is a fader. So we cannot, if we have the loud kick, if I just brought it in, and if I lower the volume by a fader, we actually did not do anything when it comes to the gain, as before the fader, it's already clipped if we put it this EQ and boosted something. So we need to bring the gain of that channel lower before it hits the insert, EQ, and so on, so on. So that way we are safe that if we later on want to boost something, we won't clip our sounds or samples or whatever we are dealing with before it hits the fader. So fader is there only for mixing and leveling, and that is the last part in the chain of every channel strip. So the easiest way in Cubase is to have a control or to reduce the gain inside the channel strip, and there's a pre-gain. So for example, as I saw already that it's peaking for 6, I will straight away put on -6. And why do I want on -6? Because when it comes to the end, when I start mixing and I change the levels all the time with the fader, I really like to have my signal to be in the same horizontal level of the peaks, to be in the same level as my fader. That way I have the best controls and I can mix really precisely. And why is that? Because if you see this here, we can see -14 dB and -30 dB. So this much space it takes for 10 dB if we are dealing with the lower levels. While from 5 till 0, it's almost 3 times or 4 times much more space. So that means that the resolution of the mixing, if we keep it in this level, is much more precise and we can mix much more precisely. So my advice is that when you have a signal on 0 dB, bring it to be on the level of the fader, and later on you will be able to mix it much more precisely, as I already showed you before. So if you are mixing in the box, this is the only thing we need to pay attention on, is to reduce, if we are dealing with a sample that is on 0 dB of peaks, that we reduce it just enough to make a little bit of space, that if we add something on top of it and if we apply any process that will boost up a signal a little bit, that we allow this space for those processes to be applied and not to clip. Now, there are also some of the plugins that is really important how much gain you push inside of them. For example, distortions. So distortions, the more gain you put inside of them, the more they will distort. This is why in almost all distortions there is in and out of the gain. You will see now, if I just bring this to default, 0, so gain is on 0, the fader is on 0, and the level of the kick is at 0 peaks. So now if I put the drive on 30%, and now the difference, if I put on pre-gain -6 and on fader +6, so the effect of a distortion changed, because it's taking less pre-gain and the level is the same because I boosted on the end of the chain. But the important thing about using a distortion on Saturn is how much of this gain you put inside of it. And there are no any rules. It is all depends by your taste and how much you want it. But if sometimes it happened that you put a Saturn on top of your bassline and then you figure out that it's distorting a lot, then you just need to hold Alt key and just move this input gain a little bit down. And by holding on Alt while you are moving the input gain down, the output gain will rise, but it will have less and less effect. So let's say that I'm bringing back to the default, and now I press play, and I will hold my Alt key on a keyboard, and I will bring this input gain down. The same applies for some of the compressors. If you just put them in and then you remove fader down, but you see that the VU meter on the compressor is taking a lot, then you need to reduce the input gain of that before it hits that compressor, and then you can crank up the output of that compressor. But the amount of the gain that plugin is taking inside of it, it's really important when it comes to the only certain plugins, not all of them. For example, the reverbs, delays, it doesn't matter how much gain they put because they work differently. But some of the distortions or some dynamic uses, the compressors, limiters, it's really important how much gain they put inside of it. And for practice, I advise you to use Fab filter, because this option with holding an Alt key and removing up or down, it will have a lot of sense. Also, like, it doesn't mean that you always need to reduce the gain of the level. If you have some samples that are really have small amount of gain, then you should do opposite and find on what gain level they work the best. As I also had the problems with the Saturn in the past, when I put on some channels, I didn't like the effect, and then I realized that it's really important how much of this gain hits inside the Saturn or some of the emulation of some analog compressors and whatsoever. I really hope that with this tutorial you got some idea of how it works, and this is a little bit really hard. I already explained in Psychedelic Tips Vol 2 a lot about gain staging, especially in the last episode on the mastering. I spoke a lot about the levels, and I explained much better than I did now, because this topic is really hard for me, as it's really hard to show you, as it's a technical stuff, and it's really not something that you can hear straight away. It also depends from your gear. I just wanted to try to make it clear, because I realized that people are taking too seriously the gain staging and they are working in the box only with the plugins. As I already said, there's only one thing you can do wrong, and this is to clip your channel. And if you have a sample on 0 dB, if you just reduce the input gain of it for 5 dB, you are safe straight away. And also, this advice is something that helped me a lot when it comes to the leveling later on, is that I put the amount of the peaks to be in the horizontal level of my fader, as later on you can mix it much more easily. I really hope that you got the information that you needed, and stay safe, and I will come back with another tutorial really soon, and next one will be a little bit more creative, as this one is not that popular, I know, but this is something that I wanted to clear and to cover this topic, so you can get some of the information that you wanted. Thank you very much, and see you next week with another tutorial. Bye.